Welcome to More Than Words, a podcast about treating the whole child, brought to you by the Reading and Language Learning Center. I'm your host, Tristan, and today I'm joined by educational consultant Stephanie Frumkin to discuss comparing school options for very bright/gifted students that have learning differences. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Kristen, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here on the podcast. I've listened to some of your episodes and I'm excited to be able to share a few things with you.
Fabulous. We're excited to have you. This is going to be great. I think this is going to be super helpful to a lot of parents.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start with an introduction. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Stephanie Frumkin, and I'm an educational consultant, and I'm the founder and owner of Exceptional Educational Solutions. And I specialize in helping families with students who are very bright or gifted and have learning differences such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia, or anxiety, and I help them find the best school fit for their child's needs. These students are often known as twice exceptional or 2E. I serve families in the DC Metro area and focus on students entering kindergarten through 12th grade. And I'm solution focused, and I can help with a variety of educational options, including public school, private school, homeschooling, online school, or perhaps a mix of those, and other options as well. I help with school placement, primarily in private school. I also do educational advocacy, so I help with IEPs and 504 plans, as well as private school support plans. I use my advocacy skills in the private school admissions process as well. And if a child is having a hard time in their private school, I can help to improve outcomes. I'm very holistic in my approach, and I help families find resources that meet their needs, such as connecting them with tutors, coaches, evaluators, therapists, or enrichment opportunities. I'm a former elementary school teacher and ESOL teacher, and also a summer camp director. And I got into this type of consulting work when I had my children who are not your traditional learners, very gifted with some learning differences. So school has not been a linear path for us. We've been involved in all sorts of schooling options. We've done private school, homeschool, online school, public school with an IEP. So I come to this work as both an educator and a parent, and I have a lot of empathy for the parents and families that I work with. I know it's not easy, but because there are so many options out there, more than most people could even imagine, I'm optimistic and that we can help find a good school fit for the individual child and family. I help a lot of very confused parents figure out what the best educational path is for their child to be successful and to thrive.
That's fantastic. Wow. It's cool when you have someone who was an educator themselves and then also a parent, because you do have both sides of the coin, which I think is just like, it enriches what you have to offer when you go to help those parents. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love working with these families. This really is my passion and calling, because having been a parent in this situation that most of the parents come to me with, I completely understand and empathize with where they're coming from. So it's really my pleasure to help them in this way.
That's awesome. And so where can people find you if they're going to look you up, or if they come to see you? Where do they find you?
Sure. So, I am based in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is outside of Washington, D.C., but I can be found on my website, which is exceptionaleducationalsolutions.com. Also on social media, and you can find me, through the links on my website. So I think the website's the best place to find me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Alrighty, let's just hop into some questions. So I think you've started to explain this in your intro, but can you say what does a gifted students with learning differences mean? Who are we talking about there?
Right. I would say there are multiple definitions of it. I will say sort of how I define it for myself and my work. So basically, I'm a student who is very cognitively bright or gifted, and that could be shown on an IQ test, or it could be someone who's just very curious and has ability to understand complex concepts. So that's the bright or gifted part. Right. And then the other part, the other exceptionality, if you say 2E, two exceptionalities, the other exceptionality is some difference that's affecting their learning. That could be in the realm of attention or behavior or emotional, social, motor, sensory, neurodevelopmental. It could be a lot of things, which usually will be in the form of a diagnosis of dyslexia, autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, kind of, you name it. There's a lot of different labels out there. So that's who I serve.
Very cool. And we have a lot of students like, we work with students with dyslexia. So we do see a lot of kids that come in with dyslexia, but they also have ADHD, or they've got the anxiety that's coming, along with the dyslexia, a lot of students with autism. And so we do see like a similar profile. But you have a different lens because you're looking for school options. So like, what are all the options that students have when they're looking at different schools?
Right. So I will say, so I do focus on, I'm focused in one city, the DC big metropolitan area. So I am focused on any kind of school that's at home. Its child can be at home. Like I want to say like this is all, there are boarding schools, there are therapeutic schools that you send your child away to, but as long as the child's living at home, I will say that there's a lot of options that most people don't even know that are out there. So there's private schools, and that's kind of all kinds of flavors of private schools. It could be a religious school. It could be, I will go into a little more detail about that, but there's all sorts of private schools. There's homeschooling, there's online school, there's public school. And again, within public school, there's so many different options as well. There's placements in public school, there's gifted programs, there's magnet programs. I really feel like the list is so endless, and I get excited talking about it because I feel like there's so many possibilities for families, and people kind of have their one way of thinking. And I enjoy helping people know what's out there.
Yeah. Cause like I went to public school. Granted, I did go to like a specialty school when I got to high school, but it was also still part of my county. So I didn't have it was just like, I go to public school and like, that's the end of it. So this is really interesting for me to hear as well. Cause I know there's public school and private school, but I wouldn't have told you that I could have gone to online school, or I could have done a mix of both. And I don't know a ton about like homeschooling or anything like that. So I don't know if you want to tell me a little bit about like public school for a twice exceptional student. Like, what are the pros? What are the cons? What do you see happen in public schools?
For public school, so it can be tricky. I would just say, like, in general, finding a school for a child with the two exceptionalities, being really bright with some learning differences, they're complex and they're hard to find placements for. We don't have, in our city, we don't have any, there are no twice exceptional schools here. So we're at that disadvantage. There are some that are, like in New York and LA and a few other cities, there are some 2E schools, and they may or may not be a good option. But you're asking about public school. And so anyway, it's hard to fit in the box. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And whatever school option you choose. But specifically public school, it's hard to fit in the box, because if your child needs enrichment, they need to be engaged, and they need they need to be accelerated, they may or may not get that in the public school. And then, in terms of like supporting their learning needs, they may, there are laws like the IDEA laws, Individual Disabilities Education Act. There are laws that require school districts to support students with an IEP. There's also other laws that support them with a 504 plan, different learning plans. But it's a fight, like school districts have a certain amount of funding they have available. And, a lot of people need to hire an advocate or consultant or someone to try to help them through the process, because it's hard. So trying to get both their needs met in a more like traditional in the box kind of school environment, which is generally your public school, that is hard. Some school districts have lots of options. Like they have some, like at DC, they have charter schools, which with their different models, and you can apply to, or maybe it's a lottery to get into certain public schools. And within the different public schools, there are different programs that, may or may not be a lottery, or may not be, selective, or, where they choose you, or might be related to your IEP and certain placements. So anyway, there's a lot there just within that one option. Right. But I'll say it's hard. It's just hard to, especially with the amount of funding that public schools have, it's hard to find a really good fit in public school. I'm not saying it can't be done. There's a school district in the area here that they have a twice exceptional program within the public school system. I've heard mixed reviews, depending on the school it's at and depending on the level. And also but it's also very challenging to even get accepted into that program. You think people contact me all the time and say, "Oh, I'm moving. I want to move from Atlanta to your area because you have this 2E program." And I'm like, well, good luck. That's going to be really hard to get your child, it's just the whole process to even try to get accepted. So, it's just harder. I think it's hard in public school.
Right. So if parents are like finding the public school is like really difficult for their child, they've like tried the IEP or a 504 plan, and neither of those two things are really working for their kiddo, like where do you recommend they go from there? What do you think they do after that?
Right. I mean, one option is to advocate in the school. So you're saying if they've gone that route and they've advocated and they've gone up the chain. And so the other options are, just to look and just to think about what, maybe there's a private school in the area that might better suit your needs. There's homeschooling, there's online schools, or some of the public schools actually, either the school district or the state pays for a virtual academy that you could, so that is a possibility, but that may or may not be the best online option for your child. I mean, I guess I'm saying looking outside the public school district at different school options. There's a lot out there.
Okay. But then I think sorry if I skipped over. So if you're in the public school system and you haven't started advocating, you recommend just looking for like an advocate and having a discussion with them about maybe doing an IEP or 504. Is that what you were going to?
Right. Yeah. Because you need to first be identified as a student with a disability first. Right. So, I mean, I do advocacy work as part of the work that I do. So I'm very familiar with the laws and the process of advocating. I mean, clearly you could do it yourself, but some people find it helpful to have a advocate or an attorney or, someone to help them through it, because not all the school district is not always always in your child's best interest, because they have to like they only have a certain amount of funds, so might go to somebody else. So yeah, I mean, definitely probably it's a good first line if your child is starting out in public and see if they can get their needs met. But it depends. Like also, you have to have some amount of I want to say grit or some amount of like tenacity. Tenacity to move through this process. It's a long process. It takes months. If your child's struggling and they don't have a support plan, it takes some tenacity to go through the whole process and get it set up and then make sure it's a good plan, and then make sure it's being implemented. And it's a lot, I mean, parents have a lot on their plates. If you have a child with these different needs, school is not the easiest thing. You have a lot for them to get them what they need. And then there's a whole enrichment piece. Like, are they able to get, because that's not part of a support plan. That's not an IEP or 504 plan.
Oh, wait. So what is the enrichment portion? Yeah,
that's not really going to be on your IEP mostly. I mean, there's some states that do have gifted IEPs. I think in Pennsylvania, I believe they have that. I've never actually seen one because I'm focused in the area. Yeah. But anyway, for the most part, that's just not part of your plan. So I don't know. Okay. That's a whole separate thing. And then trying to, if your child gets, try to get your child into the gifted program in your district, or just get some enrichment in your school. So you might have to advocate for that. And also, because if they have some learning needs, it might not be as evident that the child needs the enrichment.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So there's sort of two sides of that, and trying to get what you need, again, with limited resources in the public school. I mean, look, some people do great. Some, people do great in public school and it works. And if they have a really great school team and a great school, so if they're supportive, it really does depend a lot on who's actually in the building and who's actually in your district and how supportive they are and what your child's needs are, and if they can meet them more or less pretty easily or not.
Yeah. Public school system, I always feel so terrible for them because they don't have a lot of funds, and it is like, they've got classrooms full of kids and they're trying to get out all the things done. So I can only imagine how hard it is for them to fulfill an IEP when they're dealing with, all these other kids with maybe not an IEP, but they have their own specific needs as well. So it sounds, I can see where the tenacity has to come in for a parent to make sure that the IEP is being implemented and all of those kinds of things.
Exactly. Because I think I mentioned I was a public school teacher at one point, and yeah, there's a lot on your plate. It's a lot. It's a lot to just deal with, the new curriculum that came in this year, and the kids that are having challenges that that maybe they're not learning disabilities or some other issues, or it's a lot. There's a big classroom management, all that. So yeah, sensitivity to that, but the ultimate, we're speaking to parents here,
right? Absolutely.
You have to get what your child needs. That's ultimately the most important thing. So, I mean, we want to be sensitive, but I will say, actually, it's good. Brings me to a point that I want to make is that you can't, I mean, you can have sensitivity to the teachers, but you have to really be advocating for your child. You can't be
absolutely
too sensitive because, I mean, as a former teacher and I was advocating for my own child, I think I was having too much empathy for the teachers.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like focused on my own child. And you just need to do that. I mean, you can always give teachers gifts and thank yous and this and that. But when it comes to your child's needs, you got to advocate for them. You got to think about them first.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like it's just really hard to get stuff done in the public school. Not that it's impossible, right? But it like you said, it does take that tenacity from the parent. So what you said, there are some other options outside of public school. So the private schooling, online or homeschooling. Do you want to speak to maybe the private schools, whatever you want to start talking through?
Sure. Yeah. So private schools could be a good option for your child. I mean, really, again, it really depends on their needs and kind of where you live and what options are available. I mean, living in a large metropolitan city, and we have a lot of schools here, and like New York has a lot of schools, and larger cities. Like, but if you're in a small area, there might not be a lot. But I can speak more to where I'm from, where I deal with is the DC Metro area where there was hundreds of private schools, right? So many, which is amazing, but it's also overwhelming and confusing. So, I mean, it's great. I mean, there's just so many different models of education, and I got because I come from the traditional educational world. Elementary teacher and my master's in teaching English as a second language and also school administration and supervision. So I come from this very traditional public school kind of world. So when I had my kids, and as I mentioned before, we didn't follow the linear path of education, right? Find different alternatives. So I was very amazed to see how many different school options there were out there. And I find it fascinating, and I love learning about different school models. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about what's out there, but,
that would be great. I'm so curious because, like I said, I just went to public school. So I know about, now being at RLLC, I know about charter schools, but I don't even know that much about charter schools. And my husband went to a private school, so I do know that, but not enough. Actually, he went to a boarding school. It was partial boarding school. And you could also drive in every day, but it was, I don't know a ton. So feel free, any school you want to jump onto, I would love to hear about.
Sure. So I'll just say one thing on charter schools. So charter schools are they're publicly funded. They're basically like private schools, more or less.
Right.
I'm the nitty gritty of how they get funded and all that, but they're basically private schools that are funded more or less by the public districts, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, but they're just they run like private schools. They run, and they have certain obligations, they serve students with disabilities, but anyway, they're similar to private school in the way they have a mission and they have a certain model and the way they educate students. So I mean that's basically private schools, is they all have their different way that they do things. Some have certain values that they really uphold, like some are religious schools, follow the tenets of the religion. Some more, follow that more than others, and accept students who are that religion, or maybe some of them are more broad in who they accept. There are schools that have a social justice kind of bent, and that's their values. There are schools that just have different models of teaching. There's a couple schools in the area I can think of that have they use this. They're located in the city, and they use the city as a classroom. And they learn in the classroom, but then they go out in the city and they explore and learn, and experiential like that. And then there's
very cool.
And there's different progressive schools that maybe have more hands-on learning, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, things where, following the student interest. There's one school in the area that I love that they have a mastery-based learning approach, and they don't have any grades. And I believe they don't have any or not much homework.
Very cool.
Yeah. So there's Montessori schools that, it's definitely, certain model where there is more student choice involved, a freedom of movement, and they have their own philosophy of how they do things. So that's just a sampling. Different private schools. Oh, and then there's the schools that are focused on students with disabilities.
Okay.
So and then there's the gifted schools. And I wish there was some that I said we don't have 2E schools, although some places do, but in our area. But there are just gifted schools and they don't accept a lot of students that have disabilities. I'm not going to say none, but like more significant disabilities they're not going to take. And there's schools that like really focus on disabilities. Like there's several schools in the area that have that are really focused on students that have language-based learning disabilities. Dyslexia, graphia, things like that. And then there's other schools like this. Think of a school that focuses on bright students who have autism. And anyway, there's just a lot of different options out there.
And it's really interesting to hear those, because like we do know of a couple schools that are in our area, like the Sienna School or Fusion Academy. Those two schools, like from what I've been able to see of them, are very different in their learning. Like Fusion Academy, it's one-on-one teaching.
When I learned about that at first, I was like so fascinated by that. It's so cool, right? They come together in their work cafe, and they, can get but their instruction is individualized, like one-on-one. So interesting. It is
so interesting. So like that is a school that a private school that we have seen, and then the Sienna School, like you were mentioning, with like dyslexia and dysgraphia, they mainly focus on that. But they have regular smaller classrooms, but they have an actual classroom where it's not just one-on-one teaching. So that is also something that I've found very interesting to recommend to parents if they're looking for another school option for their kids. But do you have like a way that you would recommend parents find these private schools? Do you just like type it into Google, like find private schools in my area? Like,
yeah, that's tricky. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a child that or a professional, or, you're somebody who is working or has children that have learning differences. So, you're going to want to find a certain type of school. I mean, everyone's going to want to find a certain type of school that's going to really meet the needs of their unique child. So I think the first step is really like understanding what you're looking for. I mean, I feel like doing just like a general Google search is going to be like, you're going to just get schools that are not, be a lot of schools, and you get schools that are not right for your child. So I think the first step is really like thinking about what is your child needs, what's not going well. And since it sounds, the child seems to be needing a different environment. So what's not going well, what has gone well in the past, or what's going well in the current environment, kind of knowing your child, like what their interests are, like what your family values are, what it is that you're looking for in a school. So that's like step one. And then I guess you could maybe do a Google search, or, ask other parents. Although I will say, some of the online groups I see from parents, very well-meaning parents, sometimes don't really understand, especially they don't understand like the nuances for the different learning differences. So it's challenging, because I've seen people throw out schools like clearly don't deal with that disability.
No.
So I don't know, like maybe talking to more trusted people, like parents have a child in the school, like who or maybe more parents who have a child like that's maybe similar profile to yours. So like talk to people. But I think like sort of the online groups of parents not super helpful all the time. If your child has something really specific that something you need for your child. I mean, sometimes there's other school fairs. I've seen there's been online school fairs. You might be, I know around here, there's like a small schools fair that I think it happens twice a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's hard. I think it's hard. I think maybe being realistic about the location of where you might send your child. I think that actually is really important, because sometimes I work with parents who are like, oh, I'll look anywhere in the whole DC metro area. I mean, it's really a big area. And I'm like, well, I found you this great school, like way out in Chantilly. And they're like, and they're like, I was like, well, that sounds great. And they drive there for the visit. They're like, no, I can definitely not. Move anywhere. No, I mean, I'm not, I don't mean to make fun, but like, I'm just saying, like, it's just important to be realistic. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Use your Google map, like do it at the time when you're going to actually have to drive there, and like see what's realistic for your family. But like some parents, they work in a certain area that's further from their house. So that could work. So what works for your family in terms of distance? So, I mean, that could be a place to start also. Just like what location is reasonable for us. Also some like older students, some students that are like in high school and they're more street savvy, they can go on the metro, and so that opens up more possibilities. So kind of being specific to your individual family's needs and regarding transportation. Also, some schools have buses, so that could open up some more doors. But I would say, I guess, more saying like just think about where would be reasonable for you to look and then see, maybe then do a Google search.
Right.
There's also professionals like, me and other consultants that can help with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think before you even go to search for a school, understanding what your need is, and like you said, kind of a location-based inventory of what you guys can do in your own home, because that is something that even us, we're not technically a school, right? We are therapists, and parents will say, oh yeah, I can bring my kid to the Vienna office. And they realize that Vienna at 4 p.m. is a nightmare. And so
Right.
we say, we have a virtual option if you'd like to keep your appointment time, but you want the kid to be seen at home, or like at the end of their school day, they go, you pick them up and they start their session at home, however, but they realize, that's a better option for them, or they realize the DC office is actually just like a tiny bit closer to them. So that is a really good thing to like remind people. Location is a big deal. If you're bringing your kid in person.
Right. Because you have one other child who's like in a school like all the way across the other side of town that way. But anyway, that might be a better location for you if your child is going that way. So yeah,
that's a very good point.
There are these websites. I don't know how helpful they are. Like niche and I don't know different. I don't know how, but they but I think looking at the websites are helpful. Like looking at the location and then looking getting some personalized recommendations. And then looking at the websites. If you can really look at the websites, I think that's really helpful to really read them carefully and get a flavor of who are they looking for, who what are they about, who do they serve. I'll say the websites don't always tell you everything you need to know. Like some things they don't want to tell you. Like for example, like I know some schools that we're so welcoming and inclusive, and it sounds great. And then parents of students with autism, they're like, that sounds perfect for my child. They're inclusive and welcoming, but I might know, or other people might know, they don't generally accept students with autism. And they're not going to put that on the website because that can be discriminatory or might feel awkward for them to put that on there. But it's tricky.
It is tricky, but that's why you do what you do. Yeah. So in terms of the private schools versus a public school, do you find that private schools are better suited to assist twice exceptional students? Like when you find the appropriate private school for your child, right? Do you find that they often have more resources to be able to guide your student in the right direction? Or do you find it's similar, like tenacity to go in and find help?
Right. That's a good question. I think the goal is, if we are looking for a private school, that we want to find the best option. So and I'll do a deep dive into each school and a deep dive in actually to the student and learning about exactly what their needs are. And I do a super deep dive and I talk to therapists and I talk to tutors and I read all the reports and I just kind of, gather a lot of information to help me determine where I think they do best. And actually just meeting the students so I can know like what's their style, like what kind of peers are they going to relate to? Because a lot of it's just finding your basically kind of quote unquote home, like where they're going to belong and feel comfortable. So a lot of it's it's a lot of different factors. So I think just finding the right fit is the most important thing. And but sometimes there might be a school like, oh, this is a perfect fit socially, emotionally, but they don't offer, the student has they have a math disability and the school's not focused on that, but they're like, but what they have space in, they offer space to have tutors. So you could hire a specialist in a math disability. You could have them come in to, if they're welcoming to have tutors and they're welcoming to partner. So you can sort of make things work.
Okay.
So, but like, it's tricky. It's tricky to find, the right fit, but you also have to have the resources, we have to be able to pay for it. I would recommend if you are going to, if you need financial aid, then you want to make sure you're applying early. I work with people all year round on finding schools. So if you're looking at in like in June for the following school year, you're probably not going to get a lot of funding. Probably not going to get any, but there's some exceptions. But
Yeah.
Make sure you're applying early to get financial aid, and kind of see how much financial aid is actually being offered and what's typical. So clearly that's a downside of private school, is being able to afford it.
Do you find that like the best time to apply for a private school is the fall of the school year prior to when you want to apply? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the majority of schools, at least in this area, applications are due in January. So that could be.
Okay.
It could. I've seen it the first week of January. I've seen it like the last week of January, sometimes even February. But around that's anywhere from the early January to sometime in maybe mid-February is basically the time that most people are applying for the following year. Okay. Although, so yes, I mean, that would be a good time to apply. If you have that time available to you, not everyone does. Sometimes I get a lot of calls that people are in sort of some sort of educational crisis. Their child's not doing well, so you can still get into a school. You can definitely still get into a school that way with that. But especially if you're applying to like a more competitive school, like everyone wants to be in this school, then you do probably want to apply with that timeline in mind. So yes, you should start looking. September is a good time because they start having open houses, and I definitely want families to go visit the schools and have a shadow day if possible. Really see what the school's like. Definitely advise parents to go when school's in session. Don't go to one of those informational nights in the evening or weekend. You definitely want to go and see like who's there. Really keep your eyes open and see what's going on there. See how students are interacting. See what the education looks like, not just like bulletin boards on the wall. You want to see what's going on. But that definitely starting in the fall is a good time. But as I said, you can certainly get accepted. You can even get accepted mid-year at some schools.
Oh, okay.
And you never know. Like, I mean, I've helped people find placements in August. Okay. Either there are, sometimes people drop out. They can't fulfill their obligation. They're moving away. Who knows? Yeah. Sometimes a lot of times schools, won't fill up all their spaces. Specifically, they're like, we just want the right fit. So even if they have a lot of applicants, they're not just going to take anyone. They're just going to fill those spots. They'll leave them open. So for people, it's helpful to people that are applying late. But if you can, clearly it's better to apply in the fall and then submit your application in January. It's probably the best.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think that's another thing to always keep in mind is if you feel your child might need to move to a private school, it's good to start looking at this point in the year, right? Like starting in September and getting in, like you said, to more open houses and things of that nature.
And give you more time. So it's not like a time crunch.
Right. So I want to touch on the online and hybrid school options because while, when I was in high school, I took one class online, I never in a million years would have thought I could go to school online. So that is so interesting to me. So tell me about that.
Yeah. And there's also the homeschooling if you want to talk about that too.
Oh, for sure.
Well, hybrid is sort of like homeschooling. It could be, but so if you talk about online school.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So there's a lot more options of online school than people would imagine. There's hundreds of them. There's, clearly online school is not for any particular area unless it's run by your state or school district, and that's pretty regional. But generally, there's accredited and non-accredited online schools, and some of them are like full time. You go, a full day does not necessarily the full day that you would see in a public school or private school. Like that doesn't necessarily have to be 8 to 3. It could be, probably shorter because it's more condensed. Yeah. So, but you could just take a class or two at certain places, and some have different options. Some you could be part-time, full-time, take a class. Some are only we only offer classes. That's what they do. And then I feel like a lot of people are scared off by the idea of online school at this point because I think pretty much everyone did some kind of virtual school during the pandemic. So I think people are like, no,
Right.
but I'm like, no, wait, there's been online schools for a really long time before that. And this is what they did. Like, this is what, this is their model from before the pandemic. So I wouldn't necessarily be afraid if your child didn't do so well in the, very quickly put together, non-experienced school districts who just, I don't know, probably transferred what they were doing in person to online, and that probably didn't go very well. I mean, clearly it's not right for everybody, but I would just say that there are a lot of there's different models of online school. Some are synchronous versus asynchronous, meaning like the classes are live, online, interactive versus like some schools, like, you watch a video and then you do your work at home. You don't have to be online at the same time with everyone. So some of them I've heard, like, all the classes, your cameras are off. That's just the way it's done.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
like,
nice.
Oh, that's interesting, right? So they never ever see the other participants, but they're all there.
Huh.
Yeah. And there's just different types. Yeah. And there's just different types. There's so many. It's kind of how I was just explaining private schools. Well, I would say that's similar to online schools. I mean, they're just private schools that are online. So they do things very differently. Some are very project-based learning. Some of them actually, if they're large and they have students in the area, some have meetups.
Oh, cool.
In your local area, even though the online school could be national or international, like they have different pockets of students places. And so that anyway, online school could be a hybrid kind of school. Like, you could take a couple classes or do part-time and then also do something else.
Right.
And it also depends on your state. Like, if they allow you to do a hybrid.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to ask. So you said the online school is private school, right? It's not like a public school district offered option. Right.
So I mean, there's both. I mean, when I was mostly thinking about the different options, different models, it would be more like that would be something you would pay privately for that.
Right.
And usually it's cheaper than a private school in person.
Right. Yeah. Because you're not paying for building funds and all that. Whatever.
Exactly. Right. But but like as I said, like, there are some usually more traditional school models that the state or the school district is paying for. And there's one popular one called K-12 that a number of schools that will pay for that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't, some people like it. I mean, it's very more traditional. I've heard people not like it because it's a little too, I mean, if your child wasn't doing so great in public school, they might not do so great with online. The K-12 learning, the online, very traditional learning, a lot of hours, so got to see what's out there and what's best for your child.
Yeah. That's interesting. And so have you heard a lot of people where they know their child is going to do great in a science class that's taught by someone else, like, and they go and take that class online and then the rest they do in a different form?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. Right.
Are you saying that the hybrid is normally hybrid with homeschooling, or is it normally hybrid with public school? Like, what's the deal there?
Right. So I guess it's going to depend on your state and what they're, they legally allow for. But I usually, I would say it'd be something combined with homeschool, where, I mean, like, if you're doing an accredited online school, then I believe that, again, it's going to depend on your state, but I believe most of the time that will be considered, you're not homeschooling if you're in an accredited school. But if if you're going to do like a hybrid kind of situation, usually it will be like with homeschool. So you could, like, say, like, a high school student could take, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for high school students because if they want to get the credits, I mean, it's not necessary. There's other ways to homeschool, but it's an easy way. Like, it's not all parents can teach algebra too,
Right.
So it'd be a good, and some parents can for them, or maybe students can self-teach. But, if you feel like, your 11th grader needs an algebra 2 class, well, you might want to jump on an online class and maybe homeschool, like, or, for like physical education, they could play tennis, or take a tennis class or whatever, things that are a little more easy to homeschool. So that could be a hybrid kind of situation.
Okay.
Or it could just be like, say, like a younger kid who, they're doing a lot of their education at home or going to class, going to in-person classes, but they have a real strong interest in astronomy. So I don't know, no one locally is teaching astronomy class. So they find an online class that could teach them, it could be a person, it could be a group, it could be, could be even a college class.
Yeah.
So, then there's also that's a whole other thing is dual enrollment,
Right.
if,
Yeah.
you're a high school student, then you could take classes in a community college or local college or an online school. Again, it sort of depends on, I mean, some public school districts do allow you to be part-time at public school and part-time online or
Oh,
homeschool.
interesting.
Homeschool.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the state, really.
I didn't know that.
And it could even depend within the school district. I believe in Virginia, they it depends on the school district if they allow you to take, if you're like homeschooling, you could take some
Right.
classes or extracurriculars in the actual school, but it seems to be dependent on the district.
Wow, that's very
Yeah.
interesting though, because I was wondering if you had that option, because I feel like there are, like you were saying, like with homeschooling, when do you get your like PE requirement? Like, unless you say like, all right, well, we're all going to go play sports, but like, who knows if the parents want to do sports or have the mobility to do things of that nature. So that is a good thought to throw out there. Maybe you send your kids to school for PE or something of that nature.
If they'll allow it, and if your child
Right.
wants to, and I mean, also just a note about homeschooling. It's not as I do a lot of coaching with parents to help them understand that homeschooling is just not as stressful as people imagine it to be. It's just, it can be so I wouldn't worry so much if a student, about their PE credit, I mean, they're out, if they're playing sports and they're learning and they're active, usually that'll count. There's so many options. You don't have to, again, every state is different, but usually the theme I try to get across to parents is don't worry, take your stress level down. Let your child enjoy their education. That's like a really big benefit to homeschooling, is that you have so many choices. And I don't know if you have any specific questions about homeschooling.
Well, I don't know if I have specific questions, but I just want to, maybe, because I've always been curious about homeschooling and if they have specific requirements to take your student from public school to be homeschooled. Like, are there things you have to cover? And is it like grade? Is it done by grade? Like, how does homeschooling work?
Yeah, sure. So again, it really depends on your state. And being in the DC Metro area, there's three more or less states. There's DC, district. There's Maryland and Virginia and in this area. So they're all a little bit different. And all the different states, so usually there's some kind of reporting to the state, like intent to homeschool form. Okay. Like you say, I'm going to homeschool my child. There's may or may not be a deadline. I mean, you can homeschool at any point, but usually might be a time frame where like in Maryland, I think it's 15 days. They want you to submit this form 15 days before you start homeschooling. In Virginia, it's August 15th. You have to submit the form. Wow. So, certain deadlines. And there are some states you do not even have to report it. I find that unbelievable. You don't have to report anything. I believe in Texas that you just start homeschooling your kids and nobody's overseeing it. So it's, check your state laws, and they're not super complicated laws to read either. Like you can look it up and, your state legislation and home education, search it, or there's different organizations that can help you figure that out, but it's not super complicated. It'll tell you like what you need to do. But I mean, there's some kind of regulations where it might be like in Maryland, you need to do a portfolio review. So you meet twice a year with somebody with the school district to go over like what you've been doing, and you're supposed to cover the 8 different areas that are traditionally taught in public schools, like math, science, social studies, reading, English, PE, art, there's 8 different subjects that you have to cover, and you're supposed to provide regular and thorough instruction to your child. But you don't have to, you don't need to cover anything particular. Like if they're studying Native Americans in 3rd grade in public school, you do not need to cover Native Americans in 3rd grade. You need to cover social studies. That could be anthropology. It could be geography. It could be, I don't know, history, some European history, U.S. history. I mean, it could be so broad. So it's a lot of freedom with that.
Interesting. That is so, I'm curious about that because I've always wondered if there was like provided curriculum, if you wanted more like assistance from the school district. But it sounds like it's very open.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a downside of homeschooling, is that you usually will have to shell out some money, less than private school generally, but it depends like how you do it. I mean, you could do it all. I mean, these days, I mean, there's so much online you can get for
Yeah.
free, and there's a library. A
Right.
lot of homeschoolers use the library a lot and get a lot of books out, so you can do things like that. But generally, the school district doesn't provide materials. Although again, it really is going to be state dependent. Some school districts will. I'm pretty sure in the area, the DC area, they're not providing anything to you.
Okay.
You have to, if you want to buy books or curriculum guides or anything, balls for your PE, you gotta buy that yourself, or any classes. So mostly, but I think there are school districts that do offer some things, but again, you have to check your state. Okay. But I think most of the listeners are in the DC area, right?
Yeah, for the most part. But it's very interesting to me. Like I said, I've always wondered that. I have some friends who like homeschool their kids, and I have never asked, I guess. But I'm always curious. I'm like, what are the like guidelines essentially for homeschooling a student? And so that it sounds to me like students don't generally take like standardized tests. Like I know in Virginia, we have the standards of learning. So the SOLs are taken at the end of every year. So homeschoolers don't take those, right?
Right. Well, they can. If so in Virginia, so there's, as I said, every state's still different. So you can take certain standardized tests. It could be like even a test that just something to show that you've learned. So you could get a test by, I believe, like a psychologist who does like psychoeducational testing, or just to see where your levels are. So there are some certain standards for that, but you don't have to do that. You could also have someone evaluate you. Could be like a licensed teacher, tutor, somebody who's keeping track of what you're doing. So there's different ways that you can sort of, the goal is really to, in any state, I believe, it's sort of to more quote unquote prove that you're providing an education to your child. Right. But I don't think most school districts are extremely specific about what it is that you learn. And that is what I think is so amazing about homeschooling, which is that you have so much freedom, and you don't have to do it during the traditional school day either.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
One big benefit, I did homeschool my kids for 4.5 years. So I have a lot of personal experience with it.
Yeah.
One great thing was that vacations are a lot cheaper.
Yeah, exactly.
Vacation in March. Who's going on vacation in March? Nobody.
That's so nice.
Very cheap, and a lot of freedom, and a lot of possibilities. The possibilities are pretty endless on how you do it and what you study. And it's really just meeting the needs of your unique learner, which is amazing when you have a child who's out of the box in that way.
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, the reason I brought up standardized testing is because I know, like, a lot of times, especially if you've got an IEP for a student who needs longer time on testing, or they need a computer, or they need something to be read to them, like that's so stressful for them to sit through a standardized test. And I feel like the ability to have homeschooling where someone could come in and evaluate their child, as opposed to it being like, I have to sit in this room with like my peers and they're all going to finish before me, and I'm going to be sitting here like still finishing this test, and people are going to pick on me for it. Like, it's so nice to have the ability of them not required to take the standardized test, but they are still getting learning, and you can still show that. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're right.
Thanks for hitting on that.
Sure. Yeah.
I had a specific question of like, which I think will not have a specific answer, but I'm going to ask it.
Sure. Go.
Do you have like a specific school type that you recommend to, like a specific kind of twice exceptionality, if that makes sense? Like if you have a student with ADHD and dyslexia, do you recommend a specific kind of school, or is it super, super individualized?
Both. I think that it is super individualized, because I find with these kids that have this, these 2E profiles, they're just really complex, and their needs are just unusual and interesting. Like they're just kind of very sometimes intense people, or very intense interests, and not really intense people, but like just sort of like the intent. There's a lot going on. You have to kind of address and make sure a school can address, or a school option can address how can we address that in what's available? Because I always say I can't create schools. I wish I could, but it is even though there's a lot of options, it's still what's out there. I'm in the business of creating options, but but that being said, like, and so I visit a lot of schools, so I start to learn, like, all right, which schools are at least in the realm of possibility for the student. So that's usually what I do is, I learn about the student and the family and see what it is that is needed for that family. And then I consider what's out there. Like, are we talking mostly about private schools? In general.
I think just in general, because, sometimes like a public school option is like what the kid wants, right? Maybe they need the IEP.
Sure. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, so I guess in general, it's similarly, right. Like, so I might, right, for this type of student, I would recommend this school or this option, or for example, if a student has like significant emotional regulation challenges, that's going to be really limited on like a private schools, like, at least in this area. There's just not a lot of schools that will even consider a student that has meltdowns or no fault of the child. They're children. They're trying to do the best they can. It's really hard for them. It's hard for the parents, and the schools just don't always have the resources, or they don't know how to deal with it. I don't know what, for whatever reason, they're not taking students that have those challenges. So I'm saying, like, a child like that, I'd say, okay, well, private schools may not be I can think of two,
right?
But it might not be in where you live. It might be too far for you, or maybe right down the street. I don't know, so I have like two schools I can think of for you, but maybe, homeschooling maybe for this year, actually have a family like that I'm working with now who exactly like that, really bright, like gifted kiddo, young, and just, it just doesn't have the skills for the self-regulation. Right. So we looked at a few different schools. They were considering even moving locations.
But
didn't work out for the child to get accepted into a school. So they're doing homeschooling for this next upcoming year. So I'm helping them put together a homeschool program.
That's awesome.
So like that to me, and they didn't want to consider public because they didn't think that would be a good fit for their child. It wasn't recommended from their evaluation that a big public school would. Anyway, so like, I'm like, all right, well, what options do we have? He's little, like, I don't think an online program would be good for him because he's really young. Energy. So, anyway, so like, I'm like, all right, well, your option is really homeschooling. Okay. But how we put that together is, that would be different. I'm just saying like, so certain categories of students in my mind, like I might have ideas of like what would be a good option. So if you're asking how parents figure that out, that's, I don't,
No, that makes sense. Cause I was wondering if you had like, if there was a general, like type of education that, would fit like a specific need. I didn't know if like, because like you were saying, like an emotion, like someone who struggles with emotional regulation, like there aren't a lot of private schools specifically here that help with that. So that you're going to start probably recommending homeschooling unless you can find like a good public school area that has that like resource, or some area that has that resource. But it's just interesting to hear if there's like a starting point for parents in a specific, like with a child with specific needs. So that's
right. And I know you work with a lot of students who have like learning disabilities, right? Like, so it's like the reading disabilities, things like that. So there are, I would say for that example, yes, there are. I have sort of my short list of like, okay, these are the schools, well, first time I would look at, well, how impacted is the student with their reading? Like, some are just mild, like they have dyslexia, they're mildly impacted, and some are like severely impacted or somewhere in the middle. So, if it's mild, maybe the student could be in a more mainstream school. If the school's open-minded, maybe they have, sometimes some schools actually, even in more traditional private school, they have Orton Gillingham instructors on staff. Also look for a school like that. But there are like a list of, I have a list of schools that specifically target students that have dyslexia. Like those would be good schools. But there's, there might be more options than the ones that people might originally like automatically think of. Because first of all, if they have severe dyslexia, I know certain schools, they only do mild to moderate dyslexia.
Ah,
So that wouldn't might be a good fit for your severe dyslexic student. So,
okay. Well, that is interesting. And I guess if you've got a kiddo that's been in public school for so long and you're going to start transitioning them into a different kind of schooling, right? You're going to take them out of public school, they're going to do private, whether it be online or hybrid or homeschool or like a private school. How do you have any like tips for transitioning that kiddo from the public school system to something in a private school system?
yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that by involving the student in the process, I think that's really helpful. So, just all along, like, so, I mean, I think that most students have some inkling that things aren't going well,
Right.
So, like, I think that you can, as a parent, you could speak to that and say, hey, we're going to be, things are difficult at yours if they're in public school or private school, or, things aren't going, you're having a hard time. We want to find you a place where just be positive. You want to find a place where, there's kids like you who you're going to fit in or whatever's, but, or they can address, you're having trouble with reading. Like, this is a school that really specializes with kids, that have these certain challenges. Like, just I'd be very positive and let them know, like, this is happening. So I'm like letting them know in advance if possible, like, right, what's going on. And then part of, if they are looking at private schools, I mean, part of the process is visiting, having meetings with the school, touring the school, having a shadow day a lot of times. So they're going to be involved in the process. So, I mean, that's sort of built in. So that, but I guess having that open conversation like all along with with the student about that. And it's a little more difficult if they're going into public school because they don't necessarily have the open houses and all that. But but you can request it. I mean, I don't know. They may or may not be denied, but it's possible. They might, a nice principal might be open to having your student come in and see. I've definitely seen that where, if you ask and they would need to allow your child to come in and visit and tour, or maybe even just go to a community event at the school to get a sense. I think just like, I'm just saying, preparing them like before, let's like, kind of, the way you phrase it made me think of like, oh, you're just gonna kind of, I didn't mean this way, but it's kind of like, we're gonna drop you off at the school and
right.
I know. No, I'm just saying, like, give some advance time to
absolutely
like, get used to the idea and like, visiting the school and maybe meeting with other kids who go there, like definitely for like high school students or middle school students, like meeting some other kids so they know somebody there and getting to know a little more about the school. So I think just that whole process of, and also having open conversations with them, because if they have anxiety, a lot of the kids I work with have anxiety, just even that if that wasn't their initial diagnosis, they become very anxious because school's not a good fit. So, what are your concerns? You seem anxious about this. What are you worried about? And like, say, for example, if it's a larger school environment and they're worried about, how to deal with that, then maybe you could go over like, well, this is your safe person or this is your safe place, to have maybe a plan of action to help them feel more comfortable. But I think ultimately just finding the right fit is going to be, make it the transition much easier, because it'll just be, easy. Also, like I was thinking with homeschooling, like, you want to like involve them in the process of, like, what are you interested in? What is it that you want to do? And make sure like you have exciting classes for them, or, just plan it well. And I just like keeping them involved in the whole process of getting set up for the next environment. And again, like finding the right fit, I think is going to be the ultimate way that they transition well.
That is helpful, because I think some of our parents, like when they first, totally different, but in a similar vein of being involved, when their child first gets diagnosed with dyslexia or something of that nature, the parents are like, do I tell my kid? Do I not tell my kid? Like, how do I navigate this? Do I just like, what do you think is the best option? And we always say, tell them. Like, obviously it's a great idea to tell them, but sometimes there's so little, parents feel like they're not going to understand, or they're going to be scared, like, oh no, something's wrong with me. But kids are so intuitive. They already know they're struggling. And so by involving them in the discussion of, hey, kiddo, like, this is what's happening. Like, we've found out, like, you've got dyslexia. That's what's making reading so hard. And we're going to find you some help for that. Then it's like a weight has been lifted off their shoulders. So I it's interesting to hear. And like I said, it's in this similar vein of like having them involved as the process goes on. Obviously, there's kind of like a requirement of involvement, because if you're going to a private school, like sometimes there's like the interviews or like stuff that goes on beforehand, right? Like they bring the kid in to have like to see how they're going to fit in.
Right.
But it is interesting to hear that even with homeschooling, like it's a good reminder to say, hey, what do you actually care about? Like, what do you want to learn about?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think just keeping them involved in the process. It's interesting to hear that, similarly, like what you're saying. I think it's right. Keeping them informed, keeping them involved, let them know it's going to be okay, and look at the positives, I think.
Yeah, because I think, like I said, I think parents are scared that them hearing the diagnosis will freak them out more. But in reality, it's like they hear the diagnosis and they're like, well, great. Like I knew something was off. Like I knew something was bothering me, but now I know what it is. And I know there's a solution for it. It isn't just me feeling like sitting in my classroom, feeling like I'm not smart, or like whatever the case may be, right? Feeling like I'm struggling and have no reason for it. So it is really an interesting, like,
parallel.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like they know they're not doing very well in their school. Things aren't going well. Like you said, a solution, like gotta find them a solution. What's next? So yeah.
I think that was my last big question for you. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that came up while we were talking, but I think that was it for me. Do you have anything else you want to like share before we wrap up?
No, I've enjoyed this conversation, Tristan. It's been great to talk to you, and hopefully it was helpful to people to learn a little. I mean, I know there's a lot. It's a lot to kind of digest because there's a lot out there. But I don't know. I would just say, even though it feels overwhelming and feels like your child's struggling and it's really stressful, and as I know that as a parent, and I know that as a professional working with a lot of people, but I do see the other side. I do see families getting to the other side of it. And I both, as a parent, I mean, clearly it's a journey, but like, there's definitely, your child doesn't have to be struggling so much where they are in this current, where they are now. Like if things are not going well, there's a lot of things you can do, a lot of options, a lot of ways that things can be better. And, I definitely see positive outcomes. So I feel optimistic. I think just knowing what your options are and, trying to explore different ways to make things better. I think the worst thing maybe is just stagnating and being stuck, and just try to figure out what's next. So I don't be too afraid of change, I'd say, try to figure something out, because nobody wants their child to be unhappy. We want their child to thrive and be successful, and they can be.
Yeah. So. That's awesome. Well, I think it was very helpful, because like we had talked about kind of before going into this, I wouldn't have known a lot about all these different school options, because my background is just going to public school and knowing about public school. So I found it helpful. So I'm sure a lot of other people will find it helpful. So thank you so much for being here today. It was so interesting. And I'm glad I got to just like pick your brain about all of it. And yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. And all of your stuff we'll have all of Stephanie's things listed in the description, so that if anyone's looking for you, they can find you and maybe come ask you for some advocacy help or help finding a school for their kiddo.
Yep, absolutely. Love to help, especially going into the new school season where it's coming up.
Exactly.
So yeah, I love to help anyone who needs help. So,
awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the audience for listening. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a little rating and review. It helps other folks find the podcast, and we'll chat with you next time.